Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd very much like to continue on with our journey through the feature film works of that great filmmaker and artist who is Brian De Palma. And that brings us to a very fascinating and exciting and quite provocative work from the early part of his filmography canon. This is a film from the year 1970, and it is this work which I have here on the great release from Arrow, and it is Hi Mom. Just a quick word about this release. This is the Blu-ray that came with this set. This is the De Niro and De Palma, the early film set. This is a wonderful set, so if you're able to get it with this Arrow release, I strongly recommend it. If not, of course, there are other means by which one can watch this. Again, fascinating work from the early period of De Palma. That is Hi Mom. So a brief word about the film in general, and then a little bit later in this video, we will go into some specifics about the plot. So just in case you have not seen this film yet, Hi Mom, I think we can say that, once again, this film sits very comfortably and quite wonderfully in the filmography of Brian De Palma, I think, for a number of reasons. So first of all, this can be described as a comedy whose structure can also be described as episodic or sketch-like. There is a patchwork quality about it, which we have seen in a number of De Palma's earlier works, and we will see in subsequent works. Of course, also the devotion and the treatment and handling of comedic material, humorous material, even in this somewhat dark or sometimes even quite provocative and challenging and even controversial way, is still very much part of the tongue-in-cheek experience that is the humor side of Brian De Palma's works. He does have his thriller and suspense side, and we will get to those when you get more into the 1970s and beyond, but he also has his humor and comedic side, and here it is satirical, it is biting, it is very subversive, and it is very thought-provoking. And so in the hands of a master like Brian De Palma, you're going to get a really thorough and quite overwhelming and thought-provoking experience when watching this film. And that's true, I think, for the remainder of his body of work. Also, we have elements of, in terms of the war and the draft and the war, but also veterans and the returning from the war and trying to engage with certain aspects of society. And in this patchwork structure that we have, other aspects of society do involve, say, race and racial relations, relations between people, like relationships, couples, and also the way in which this turns perhaps somewhat ironic and somewhat hypocritical and maybe even quite vicious and mean and deadly, to the point where it becomes quite unsettling. And all throughout, again, we are being confronted with a type of style and substance that is both filled with meaning and also has a great sense of wit and design and precision about it. So there is much to say about this work. There is a lot of value and a lot of, as I say, quite provocative aspects of this, which makes it a wonderful part of the filmography of Brian De Palma. Once again, if you have not seen this film, and if you are fascinated by the works of Brian De Palma like I am, this is a really great place to go. This is a wonderful example. For many people, I think it's very emblematic and one of the best representations of Brian De Palma's so-called early period. So you're getting a great example. Again, you have also many elements that we can say travel throughout his filmography, while itself being its own full-blooded cinematic experience. So, my dear friends, this is the work which is Hi Mom. My dear friends, thank you for coming back. And so now let us speak with a little bit more detail about this work. So if you have seen the film, let us have a conversation. Once again, if you have not seen the film, I strongly urge to maybe turn off this video and then watch the film. And you can always come back at any time and we can talk about Hi Mom. So you're still here, so let us now talk in detail about this. So once again, we have the character, the Robert De Niro character. This is John Rubin. And if you recall from an earlier film, which is Greetings, you also had Robert De Niro playing a character named John Rubin in that film. And so oftentimes or sometimes one might say or one might see the description of Hi Mom or the relationship between Greetings and Hi Mom being described as that between film and sequel or semi-sequel or sequel in spirit of some sort. So it is very tempting, I think reasonably so, to view this film as a type of sequel to Greetings, or at least there is a certain sense of continuity. And I think that continuity, in again from a certain perspective anyway, could also be further supported by, for instance, the appearance of Alan Garfield and a similarity in the way in which the Alan Garfield, Robert De Niro performances and character relationship, seems to be turning or evolving from what we saw of their relationship to a certain degree anyway in Greetings. And now in Hi Mom, it does involve this idea of filmmaking. It does involve the making of adult films or pornographic films, which is again, I think, some kind of a link or connection or thematic residue, one can say, from the earlier film Greetings. And but at the same time, it does operate on its own. There is a way in which this film seems to be on its own independent spirit, as it were. And here we have the further development of other themes and that come out in a very explosive way, in a very provocative way. But before we move to that, so one of the avenues of exploration, as we know, is this filmmaking element, which lends itself and relates to the notion of camera, art, and art versus reality, art within art. And the meta aspect of that type of filmmaking when it's becoming a type of self-reflection within the works of Brian De Palma, like Hi Mom, and also voyeurism and the way that that can turn somewhat maybe, on the one hand, it might have a sense of the art and auteur. It also has a sense of the seedy and the shady and somewhat creepy as well. But that's all part of the mixed sense of feelings and emotions we feel when you watch a film like Hi Mom and any other film by De Palma for that matter. And indeed, we have the Robert De Niro character at the center of this, especially when we see him trying to engage with various relationships that we see throughout the film. One such relationship, one key relationship, of course, is that with the character portrayed. This is Judy, who is portrayed by, once again, Jennifer Salt in another appearance in a Brian De Palma film. And we see that this relationship, while it does tend to come about in relation to, say, this voyeurism, camera work, peeping Tomism, rear window aspect as well, it does also formulate into another discussion or treatment or handling of the relationships within the couple dynamic. And so that will carry itself throughout this film, and also, not this film, but throughout this section of the film, and also towards the climax of the film, or one of the climaxes of the film, as it were. So this is a kind of a developing theme that finds its roots very early on. And of course, it's also based on a sense of storytelling and lies and deception on the part of the Robert De Niro character in order to achieve this aspect of filming, a type of twisted voyeur project, again, for the sake of art or pornographic art. And so that is one avenue of description. As you can see, it has elements of the comedic, it has elements of the absurd, it also has elements of the slightly creepy and disturbing. And especially when we see this relationship aspect carried to its full, say, fruition by the end or close to the end of the film, to the point of destruction and chaos and death and killing with the explosions and everything. So this is carrying it to a type of very deadly set of conclusions that I think not undermining to that really fully buttress and fully say create a sort of full-bodied experience of the disturbing and the creepy aspect of this avenue of thought. So it has that really interesting turn of evolution about it, this line of the film Hi Mom. Very fascinating indeed. And we can say too that has its links with the earlier film Greetings. So it goes from Greetings to this aspect of Hi Mom at the start of the film, and by the end of the film it seems to be going towards a sense of destruction and chaos. So very fascinating indeed. Also, we have to remember that John Rubin, the Robert De Niro character, is described as a veteran. So his relationship with the war, the Vietnam War, and his return, as it were, back to quote unquote polite civilized society. And part of that is this avenue of filmmaking endeavor. And another avenue too is the idea of performance and performance art. Now, this brings yet another very fascinating exploration when we get to concepts of or treatments and handlings of race and race relations and depictions and representations of race in art and theater, and the blurring of the lines between performers and audience members. And we have, therefore, one of the most famous or infamous sequences in this film, and indeed in the body of work of Brian De Palma, Be Black Baby sequence. And of course, this is referring to the performance, but the performance is turning the idea of performance on its head, a subversion of subverting of that type of expectation of audience and participation and the actors, because we have therefore the roles are reversed. And the concept being that this audience or group of audience members who are white audience members, they are participating in a very active way with this theatrical performance, and therefore trying to live or embody the African American experience in 1960s, 1970s America. So it is very, it has this sense of being filmed with a type of very frightening cinema verite, a type of direct and quite in your face cinema verite style. There's also a sense of the chaotic and the bizarre, and also the confusing, and also, of course, at the very heart of this is the idea of both in satirical tones and also in direct tones, both metaphorical and indeed direct. The notion of the a reenacting of the African American experience, again from the vantage point or from the basis of race, racial relations, and racism. And so it has therefore that utterly fascinating and provocative, biting satirical edge that is also almost a type of scathing indictment of certain social, quote unquote, mores, or certain proclivities of sort of a general perception of certain classes of society at the time. At least this is the type of attitude that we see being adopted by the performers in this particular performance. And then we also see the other side of that, which is the audience members. So this is a very fascinating and indeed controversial and provocative aspect of this film. It also goes towards the idea of art and the creation of art for a type of socio-political purpose, and also for the sake of provoking and being confrontational, and also the idea of audience participation and the like. And we see this a lot in De Palma's works. For instance, within this film, Hi Mom, of course, with the idea of John Rubin early on the film, with the voyeurism and the filmmaking and the pornographic films, excuse me. And now we have the idea of theater and art and the audience perspective. And also we have other works that have a similar type of line, like Dionysus in 69, etc. And also The Phantom of the Paradise, the idea of the performance and the audience members and what goes on behind the scenes, and how that the reality tends to be blurred when art and reality kind of clash in a way that in many cases, for instance, here and also in Phantom of the Paradise and elsewhere, can turn quite deadly indeed. And so we have in the hands of Brian De Palma, this type of aspect is utterly jaw-droppingly captivating and very, very thought-provoking. You know, it becomes a sense of thought-provoking in the sense of who should we regard in terms of the victims of victimization? Who should we regard in terms of those who are manipulating and those who are being manipulated within the context of this theatrical interactive theatrical experience on the one hand, or also as it stands as a metaphor for how it's perceived as a metaphor for something grander in the grand scheme of society, and thus the inequalities of society. So who is being manipulated and who is the manipulator? And so that type of interactive and ongoing dialogue that happens between viewer and film, I think is one of the great and thought-provoking and quite brilliant aspects of this, while being very challenging and controversial at the same time. So, and of course, this film does go into very disturbing and quite quite vicious places as well, in terms of the, as I say, the turn to violence. John Rubin, of course, he has his connection with the theater art performance itself. This also has the idea of authorities and authoritarian brutality. This also might have its links to not just the society and age in terms of application of authority versus resistance, but also again reminders and links to the veteran aspect of John Rubin, Robert De Niro's character. And indeed, we might recall or we might be reminded of this similar type of treatment or handling of character in a very memorable film that stars Robert De Niro as well, which is called Taxi Driver. And so I think the parallels between the character in that film and the character in this film, I think, can be well stated, as well as, again, a further examination in this kind of dark, witty, and quite ironic tone, the continuing evolution or devolution of the character arc of John Rubin. Again, we have that aspect as well. And then I mentioned too the turn to violence, a sort of almost absurd take on destruction, chaos, and killing. And then also to the idea in which this can be seen to be almost fame or attention seeking, and the way that the title, Hi Mom, integrates back into the film itself, and the way that John Rubin seems to be using this as a means to greet the audience, greet the members at home, using the media or news as a means, as a platform to gain attention, and also feigning victimhood, whereas we know that he is the perpetrator rather than the victim. And all these lies and deceit and chaos, they seem to go not just unanswered, but they seem to go unpunished. And not only are they unpunished by the film's end, but they go so unpunished and so under the radar by the authorities and police, etc., that a character like John Rubin, who ends up becoming, in a way, almost like the ultimate anti-hero or antagonist, or perhaps even villain of the piece, Hi Mom, it's so our faith in these institutions is so undermined by this point that what does he do? But he says, right, Hi Mom, and smiles, and that ends the film. So that is, I think, a very scathing indictment type of statement, and also very richly and darkly humorous, and also filled with a lot of irony and a lot of subversive approaches to the use of cinema in a socio-political realm, as well as, of course, a furtherance and a continuation of this idea of Brian De Palma and comedy. And we also understand that that comedy has a biting edge, that has a very dark edge, has a very vicious edge, but is at the same time, or because of that, it is also so thoroughly thought-provoking and engaging. This is one of the great works of Brian De Palma. It is indeed, again, regarded by many as being one of the most important works during his early period. We see also the sketch element, the editing element, the way that voyeurism and a point of view and the framing of the camera become all encompassing, again, in the context of the visual style and panache of Brian De Palma's cinematic style, and also the way in which things are intercut in a way that almost is jarring while at the same time suggestive of a type of organic whole. And that type of cinematic paradoxical approach to filmmaking is indeed one of the great stylistic and ambitious aspects of Brian De Palma's genius as a filmmaker, as well as capturing the hurt and the lies and deceit and the absurdity of certain relationship dynamics going forward. So there is a lot here about the film as itself, and also there's a lot here, of course, as regarding the film in the context of the filmography of Brian De Palma as a whole. What a great film this is. I just want to say one thing too. The release here, again, the one that I have here by Arrow, is brilliant, and the essay here is with the booklet here that's included is really quite brilliant. This is called American Godard by Christina Newland, and of course this is a type of reference to one of the ways we can regard Godard, not Godard films, but De Palma films, as also means by which they're connected to other filmmakers, or homage, or links, or references to other films and other filmmakers. I think Godard is often mentioned and Nouvelle Vague techniques are often mentioned in the same breath as a discussion of films like Hi Mom or Greetings. And I think very reasonably so, because there is this type of way in which those say editing or cinematic camera techniques take us to a place that is sort of in the realm of the direct and also the meta. And so I find that to be very much in line with the excitement and vitality of Brian De Palma's films, including his early work. So that's one reference. I also mentioned Rear Window. There's a very Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock film, Rear Window-like aspect of a Hi Mom, especially the early component regarding the filmmaking and the positioning of the camera and looking through the windows of the apartment building across. So and the different stories that are going on, that has a very type of Alfred Hitchcock link to it. And so we will see, of course, how Alfred Hitchcock will be a very, very important part of the cinematic, say, approach and philosophy of Brian De Palma, especially in the context of a number of his films. Again, we will talk about when we get more into the 1970s works. But with that being said, we do have a Hitchcock influence, one can say, or one can interpret, even in this film like Hi Mom, which is really, really great. And so the discussion points and the excitement factors, I think, keep on going with the Brian De Palma filmography. And Hi Mom is, for my money, no exception. It is really a very, very brilliant and quite a key work. And it's, as I say, very shocking. I mean, there's some moments here that are very, very shocking, especially in the area of how it handles race and race relations, race depictions of race. And we have also the Garrett Graham character and how his character seems to be positioning itself or trying to be part of this dialogue or discussion, while at the same time being himself very confrontational and in many ways quite challenging in terms of some of the ways in which that character handles this particular arena. So it's very thought-provoking and very challenging in a lot of ways. But that's one of the great gifts that Brian De Palma cinema really gives to us. It really gives us a lot of food for thought. And this film, Hi Mom, released in 1970, but still even now, many years after the fact, now it's 2022 from the time we make this video, it is still so relevant. And that's one of the great things about this, which is Hi Mom. Okay, my dear friends, so thank you very much, and we will continue our discussion of the Brian De Palma works going forward. I look forward to seeing you at the next video, but until then, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Brian De Palma films. So until the next one, my dear friends, please be well, and cheers.